Orlando Duran is saying $5,000 on maintenance a year, maybe if you have quads. Well, Orlando, it is totally going to depend on the engine that you have and how much time you get to use it. Whenever people say things like, on average, it costs you $1,000 to $5,000 a year to service your outboard or your boat, it is a very general term because $1,000 to $5,000 is a wide range because there are so many variables. And yes, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4 engines, but if you had quads, $5,000 a year on maintenance is going to be extremely low. People that have quads on their boats are sometimes spending $5,000 a month just on the fuel for that boat. So it is going to totally depend on your engine. If you only get to use your boat for 3 months out of the year, then yeah, $5,000 on maintenance is going to be a little bit high because you're probably only going to be putting on 100, 200, 300 hours in your short little season. So at most, you're going to be doing a 300-hour service with 2 100-hour services on your engine if you're following the regular maintenance schedule for pretty much every outboard. Now, let's say on average, you've got like a 150 to a 300. If you're servicing a 5 horsepower outboard, it is going to only cost you $100, couple $100 maybe. If you're doing the work yourself, if you're paying somebody to do it, they're probably $100 to $200 an hour, but a 5 horsepower engine isn't going to cost you that much to service. If you've got a 115, 150, 250, 300, I'm going to say it's going to be anywhere between $400 and $1,000 per engine for a 100-hour service, totally dependent on the location of where you're at and if you use a dealership to service the engine or if you service it yourself. If you service it yourself, yeah, you might be able to spend $200 on parts, something like that. And then if you paid someone to do it, then you might end up spending $400 or $500 or $600. And then if you have, say, a 300 horsepower engine, you might be $700-800. So depending on where you're at and what you're getting done is going to depend on what it's going to cost. But you need to remember that people get to use their boats a lot more in other locations. There's people that put a couple 100 hours on a month during the summer. Like during the summer, some people use their boat all the time. So over the course of, say, a 6-month season that they're using their boat, they might put 500-600 hours on their boat. So if they put 500-600 hours on their boat in a year, they're going to be doing a lot of 100-hour services and a lot of 300-hour services. On average, a 300-hour service is going to cost you anywhere from, say, $1,000 to $2,000 per engine, depending on what engine you have and where you live. If you have someone do it, it's going to generally cost you anywhere in between that range. That's a very broad range. So if you've got quads on your boat, a set of quads for a 300-hour service could range anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 for the service, just for, the 300-hour service. So $5,000 a year on maintenance is a very general term because there are hundreds of different outboards. There are thousands of different locations, and there are a ridiculous amount of things that could need to be done at the same time as a service. And whether or not, is your neighbor doing the service? Is the dealership doing your service? Are you doing the service? So, if you did a 100-hour or if you did a 300-hour service on your own engine, my guess for let's say you've got a 150, just in your parts alone, you're probably looking anywhere from $200 to $300-400, depending on where you buy your parts, what oil you get, what kind of impeller you get, what kind of gear lube you get, all the seals like your spark plugs, your thermostats. Depending on your engine, you're going to be a decent amount in parts and tax. So just think about all that kind of stuff. It's not necessarily like $5,000 a year on maintenance is, just directed at you and how you use your boat. That's the average. On average, $1,000 to $5,000 a year on maintenance is what it costs to service a boat. based on, if you take boats as a whole, from the guy that's got a 2.5 horse outboard to the guy that's got twin 600s, you average all those off, it falls right along in that number range there. So I think that's a good question. I think that's a good topic. I think there's a lot of people out there that might be thinking the same thing is, if you only have a 2 to 3 month boating season, you're going to be looking at, how can you put that much time on your boat? Well, if you can go boating on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like if you can go boating whenever you want, and not to mention also something that I probably should have even said is that think about the people that have to go a very far way. I mean, there are people in some places where you've got to go 60, 70, 80 miles offshore just to where they go fishing. So, if you're running a 60-mile trek that's taking you, say, 2-3 hours to do that, depending on how fast you're going, you can only go as fast as the water's going to let you. But if you're running 30 miles an hour and you got to go 60 miles, it's going to take you 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to get back, and that doesn't include any fishing. So the fuel that you're going to burn and the time that you're putting on your engine just for one trip of fishing, one trip is 5, 6, 7 hours. So, if you did 5 of those trips, you're looking at 35 hours. So you can kind of track that up. And if you did that over a week, like over a month, you've got over 100 hours on your boat. So it definitely totally depends on where you're at, how you use your boat, for how much you're going to spend on service for a year. Andrew Archer says, hi, why are you replacing the anodes? They don't look worn. Another thing about service, anodes. So the anodes that we replaced on this engine, something that people might not know about anodes is that it's not just the way they look, because an anode can get worn out from the inside. Theoretically, or well, not even theoretically, basically whenever you do anodes, you're supposed to either look at them or weigh them. Those are the two ways to see if you have a bad anode. If it is 2/3 depleted, well, 1/3 to 2/3 depleted or 50% depleted, or if it weighs 50% less than it did or 1/3 less than it did brand new, then it's bad and it's time to replace it. So weight is something that I think a lot of people might overlook when it comes to when to do your anodes. But also, a lot of people will also do them just as their service. Like they want, here's my service. I've got 400 or 500 hours on the engine. I want to replace my anodes, but do the full deal. So that way in their records, they know when the last time something got changed. So that's something that it's not just a visible thing with your anode. John Lincoln says, Active Captain makes it silly to buy any chart plotter other than Garmin. It's so convenient to sit on my couch and see everything my plotter can. Plan routes, place locations, run my autopilot, etc., all from the phone or tablet. Nobody else has an app even close. That is true. Active Captain, and even before Active Captain, when they have a home port, that is one of the things that I think sets Garmin apart is the usability. I mean, Garmin has been ahead of the market in usability for quite a long time. All the other brands are now pretty user-friendly, but before that wasn't really the case. Garmin, for the most part, has always been really user-friendly. So, you do kind of got to give it to Garmin for that. Is that to say that Garmin is the best when it comes to fish finders, chart plotters, MFDs, all that kind of stuff? I wouldn't go as far to say that, but they're definitely, I think electronics come down to also who it is that's using it and what they're using it for, because different electronics have different features that different people in different circumstances are like more geared to, you know what I'm saying? So I kind of still look at it like that, opposed to saying this is the best. Well, you can't really say that something is the best of everything when in one situation something is going to be better than another thing. When you reverse a situation, it could be vice versa. So kind of the way I look at that. M. Gallagher, I think I said that right. Can you mount a trolling motor on the transom versus the bow on a 17-foot Boston Whaler? Technically, yes. You can put a trolling motor wherever you want. Will it function correctly? Not entirely. Again, back to the different uses of something. Here's point in case. A trolling motor, yes. For some people, putting it on the bow like that, trolling motors are designed to be on the bow of the boat. That's just what it is. The GPS, the tracking, all the features that it has, the GPS location, when you put the lock there, it's going to want to put that in the front of, like, you know, wherever the current's going, that's the GPS where it's going to hold and let the boat slide around. So if you put that on the back of your boat, now all of a sudden that feature doesn't necessarily work the way you want it to work. But in other situations, in certain rivers and other situations, you want the trolling motor to be on the back of the boat. So, I mean, think about it as like a kicker engine. You know, you can see a lot of people that use kicker engines on the back. They've got a 25 horse or a 15 or a 9.9, and they just use it for trolling, and it's a kicker engine. So you can use a trolling motor as a kicker engine if you're trying to use your boat in the use of a kicker engine. Like, you know, the way you're using it is needed, that, not necessarily a trolling motor like the way you're talking about trolling motor. So two different uses, two different things. Yeah, you can put the trolling motor wherever you want. I mean, you can put the thing off the side of the hull if you really wanted to. I mean, will it function? Yes. Will it function completely the way you want it to? Probably not. I mean, we've seen it in different situations on the bows of boats where anchor lockers and other situations, a trolling motor doesn't always fit perfectly on the bow of your boat. There's all kinds of different configurations. And so, you know, we've seen them where you put the trolling motor across the bow like this is the bow of your boat, and you put the thing like this and send it over the side. The way it holds the boat and the way it tracks and stuff, it's not going to be nearly as effective. Can you do it? Will it work? Yeah. Whalerman Steve. My 2009 50 horse Merc 2-stroke had the throttle plates open, and I didn't notice it, and I started the motor. It revved up so fast and wouldn't shut off. Eventually, it ran itself out of fuel. That's interesting. You don't really hear, I mean, that's considered a runaway. That's a runaway like that. You hear more of a diesel runaway. You don't hear of a 2-stroke runaway as often, where the throttle plate is completely open and you've got an issue with the engine and it just takes off until it burns all the fuel out of it. That's more common in diesel, but yes, that does happen in a 2-stroke. So that is something to point out and notice, because yeah, it's not as common. I mean, with a 4-stroke, I don't think I've ever heard of a runaway 4-stroke, but 2-strokes, yes, that can happen. Mike Carnival, Walmart sells a 2-stroke Hankai 6 horsepower outboard for $575. Have you ever worked on one of these motors? Just curious how much of a pain it is to get parts. Plan on putting this on an inflatable 8-foot rib. I do not have any experience with this. It is surprising to me, though, that all the major brands like Yamaha and Mercury, Suzuki, these companies that don't sell 2-strokes in the United States but still sell 2-strokes in other places around the world, but yet Hankai, a Chinese brand, can link up with Walmart and sell you a brand new 2-stroke delivered right to your door. I'd find that kind of interesting. Maybe it has to do with the horsepower range, but I don't have a lot of experience with them. I am trying to get my hands on one. It's not like I'm really going to go out and spend $575 plus the shipping, or even spend, I would probably be looking to get like an 8 or a 9 or something like that. But I'm not going to spend $1,000 on a Chinese outboard just so that way I can check it out, and I mean, it could be really good, but me personally, I don't really feel like spending that kind of money on something that I'm just buying it for, some academical testing, if you might. But I would like to get, same thing. There's more brands than Hankai. I mean, a Hidea, there's Parsun. I'm trying to think of, there's a couple of different, these are Chinese brands. I mean, people say Chinese, but there's not really, China doesn't really have any foot in the USA market when it comes to outboards. They don't. Parsun is probably the biggest outboard manufacturer, but they are still very, very, most of you have probably never even heard of Parsun until I just said that. And same thing for Hidea or Hankai. They're not very well known. Honda, Tahatsu, most of that stuff is it's Japanese in other places. It's not really like a Chinese brand. So yeah, I wouldn't mind getting my hands on a Hankai or a Hidea or a Parsun. So anybody that has one of those and wants to get rid of it and they're not really looking to get MSRP out of it, I'd be interested. Ray Buttigieg, I noticed you hooked up the battery leads to the accessory posts rather than the larger terminals. Is this considered okay? Well, basically, yes. You don't want to use the posts. He's talking about on the battery. Normally, you look at your car, you're normally looking at your batteries and it's got that ring terminal and you crimp it down and it clamps onto the battery, giving it more surface area to pass power through, basically. On a boat, no. Your cable, the end of it, you tighten it down to the lug, to the stud, and you put a nut on there and tighten that down. You don't want to use the clamp on because that can get loose. In a boat, it is taking way more force. It's always moving. It's always flexing. So that battery vibrating all the time like that, those clamp-ons, you don't want to use those because they will come loose. Same thing for wing nuts. You don't want to put wing nuts on your batteries in your boat. No, I say that, but like we've been kind of the theme of this episode, I guess, is more about the differences and the variances that you can have in, the different stuff in your boat. If you have a 9.9 horsepower outboard and you've got a GNU, having wing nuts on your battery is not like, oh my goodness, this bad thing. Like, you probably take the battery out of the boat. So why would you put a nut on there and carry a wrench with you to load your battery in your engine? So, that's kind of that conversation there. But no, those clamp-ons, I wouldn't use those. Even on anything. Robert Reagan says, I have the same motor, talking about a 90 horsepower 2-stroke Yami, but for some reason the speedometer stopped working. Didn't know if you could do a video on what to look for. Great video. Thank you, Robert. For the most part, most speedometers on the boat are ran by your pedo, which is a little hole in the lower unit. There's this little hole in the front of the lower unit, and that takes water in. It runs it up through a tube through your engine to a little tiny hose, and then that hose then transports all that water that is being forced into your lower unit through that little hose into the back of your speedometer gauge, and that's what is giving your speed on your speedometer gauge. For the most part, most people, I would say that, I think it's going to be a large number. Like large as in like 95+% of people do not use a water pressure speedometer. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. But my estimation is from all the boats that I've been on, it's very rare for somebody to use a speedometer like that anymore. Yes, the boats still have them. And yes, most of them sometimes function. But the problem is, especially in saltwater, that little hole in the front of your lower unit always clogs up. You got to get a little drill bit and then like screw the drill bit in there to get it all cleaned out. And it's just a consistent pain with keeping it unclogged. And then now you've got this water going through your boat. So everybody's got a GPS on their boat. By and large, everybody's either got a phone or GPS. And so the speedometer on your GPS is going to be way more accurate than the water pressure speedometer that you're talking about. So do you really want to go through all the work to get it working? I made it halfway through putting that speedometer back in that Key West and I stopped. I'm like, I don't know, this little hose, the little clear hose, it's always clogging. It's always a problem. It'll work. It'll function, but the effort, it's within a couple months, the thing clogs up and it's no good anymore. So it's kind of like you just have the gauge there now, unfortunately. Colin Strickland says, why do you think it is that we rarely ever see boats set up with twin Yamaha show motors when we see boats with twin Mercury Pro XS's / racing motors more regularly? This is actually a really good, comment because I have no idea. Like I literally have no idea. I never even thought about it. But now that you say it, now I'm like trying to think about an engine. Like I'm like, I can't think of a boat that I've seen that has twin shows on it. I don't know. There's a reason. It's not like you can't take, I actually does the show not have a counter rotating? I don't know. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if the show has a counter rotation engine. I would think it does, but it might not. So I don't know. I mean, it's not something that I've really looked into or thought about. Okay, so I tried to look it up, and it looks like you can get a counter-rotating lower unit for the show. So, like I said, I don't know. I've never really thought about it, never really even tried to think about it. So I think that's a great comment. Maybe someone else knows all the ins and outs, and you'll let us know. Junebug, what's the best type of boat for Lake Okeechobee fishing? Well, in my opinion, I'm going to be going, so Lake Okeechobee it's a big lake, and it's like 8 feet deep across that thing. I mean, like the whole thing's like 8 feet deep. It's not like a deep lake, but it is big, and it can get nasty out there. So I'm going to say that I would want more like a bay boat, a flats boat, a skiff, a bass boat, something low gunnels and good access all the way around it. So that way you can fish all the way around that boat. I'm not, I don't think you really want to have something with high gunnels on it. That's like more like for offshore center console type stuff. I think you're going to be more happy with a skiff, bay boat, reef boat, flats boat, bass boat, like, something that's more set up where you can stand at the front of the boat and like fish off the bow in multiple different directions. You can kind of like get up into stuff, put a trolling motor on there. That's what I think would be best. But again, it totally depends on what type of fishing you're trying to do too. I mean, I think you're going to want something in that area though. You're not going to want, someone with really high gunnels. Again, depending on where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. That's my guess. So Netright says, when running a jet pump, we often ditch the thermostat because it can clog up when we run shallow. Otherwise, the motor can overheat. Another different situation. So, I mean, this theme is actually kind of held true about most of these comments about being in a different situation. Really, you don't want to get rid of your thermostats. But just like talking about Lake Okeechobee in different seasons and where you're boating at, people that boat a lot on a lake have different problems than you do offshore. So like if you're on a lake, you're always fighting grass. So bass fishermen have a problem with this. And then, anybody of these jet pumps, you're fishing on a smaller lake and you're always running through weeds and always running through grass. Thermostats are always clogging, and it can actually be a problem. Like you're talking about overheating. Yeah, that was a serious problem with the Optimax, is where you'd have that side thing, you take the thing out, and there's a screen there that would be clogged full of grass, and it could get to the point where you'd overheat the engine and blow it up. So if you're in very, very high grass situation and you're on a lake and it's running fairly cool water, you probably can just ditch the thermostats on certain situations like you're saying, and you're always running shallow. You're always sucking up a ton of weeds, and otherwise, if you don't, it clogs up, and now all of a sudden you're overheating your engine. So totally understand. The situation determines what exactly is right or wrong to do. I mean, we're not talking about situational ethics here, but in different situations, there's a different way to run the engine. English language training says, great podcast. Thank you, English language training. Could we discuss which power boat would be best to transition to after a full-time liveaboard small sailboat on a budget? Totally depends on what you want to do on the water. I mean, that's the real question here. We need to start with that question. What is it that you like to do on the water? Do you like to do river fishing? Do you like to go offshore? Are you into water sports? Do you like bass fishing? Do you not really like fishing at all? Are you more into just hanging out and doing cruising? Because depending on any one of those situations, it's going to be a different boat. Like if you're trying to go offshore, yeah, a small center console, because we're talking about a budget here. A small center console, like a 21, 23. It's not really like a small, but it's something that you can go offshore comfortably and get a good day's worth of fishing in and come back and get something that's not going to break the bank. But if you're in an area where you're running up and down rivers all the time in really shallow water, maybe a flats boat's really what you want. or maybe you're on a lake where there's a lot more bass fishing and you want a bass boat, or maybe you just like cruising around on the lake or the rivers that you're at and you just want a pontoon boat. So, or maybe you're looking to still continue on the live aboard type of lifestyle and you want a cuddy cabin, like a walk around, like gets you, a little bow rider that's got a little cuddy cabin in the front that you can do overnights on, and you can go a couple miles up shore, and rent a slip, stay on the boat, go to an island, stay on the boat, come back. Like, depending on what you like to do on the water is going to determine what exactly is going to be the right boat for you. Like that's the first thing that you need to figure out first before you go figuring out which boat's going to be best for you. It's what do you want to do? Okay, now tag 76 says, given the discussion about seafoam, what are your thoughts about Lucas upper cylinder lubricant in the fuel for use in Yamaha 4-strokes? I'm just thinking about it from a preventative perspective, but would love your opinion. Well, if we're solely talking about preventative perspective, I would just use Yamaha ring free. That's it. Now, if we're talking about experimental stuff or trying to do something on the cheap or Lucas upper cylinder lubricant is made for like cars, from what I know. Like I'm not a Lucas Oil company expert. So it's not like I, know a bunch about Lucas Oil, but from what I understand, Lucas Oil, their upper cylinder lubricants increases fuel mileage and or your fuel economy. It increases your fuel economy and cleans injectors and stuff like that. Like it's just a lubricant that increases your fuel economy. How it does that, I'm not really sure. It's got some kind of oil in it. It's a lubricant. So my guess is that it's like a seafoam. It's like a ring free. Again, I don't know, 100% the chemical makeup of it, but anything that's going to increase your fuel economy, you're going to be burning less fuel. So it's just trying to make a more complete burn. How it does that, I'm not really sure. The only thing you always want to be concerned about whenever you do try stuff, lubricants and fuel additives in outboards, is remember that your engine's running 55, 6,200 RPM compared to your car that's doing 2,500, 3,000 down the highway. So you're double the RPM. Now, how does some of these lubricants or fuel additives hold up over time at that higher RPM range? I might not be the right person to ask that question. I really don't know. I don't work in an R&D department and kind of look at that kind of stuff. I'm more of real world experiences and stuff. And so that's what I'm thinking about is what's this going to do at 6,000 RPM? Am I still getting proper lubrication on the engine? Because that's the main concern. At 6,200 RPM, you want to make sure that everything's still lubricating properly, where on a 4-stroke, it doesn't really have anything to do with your fuel system. Fuel does cool, but at the same time, you shouldn't have any issues with the lubricant. So will it burn hotter? I don't know. If we're just looking for preventative maintenance, I'm just sticking with ring free. I don't really think overcomplicating things and, reinventing the wheel, I guess, is the right way I would phrase that. Steve Myers says, in the real world now, what about running on one diesel engine or big cats when cruising a 100-foot yacht rather than both? Is that good to do or bad for the boat/engine fuel burn? I have 3 family members living between mile marker 88 and 72 for over 40 years. I lived there for 2 years. So that's cool, Steve. I actually commented back on this one, and I put it this way, because there's a lot of people that want to do this. I don't have a lot of experience with diesels or 100-foot yachts. That's not, I've been more recreational, your average 13-footer to 45-footer. I don't get into, now that outboards are getting into the 53-footers, I do that kind of stuff because it's still outboards. But you get into the 100-foot yachts, I don't really have a lot of experience with that. But it's basically the same thing, though. people that go off trolling and you want to save fuel and save hours on your engines, so you will troll with one engine versus two engines. Like if you got twins, you troll with one engine, turn the other one off, trim it up out of the water. Like, realistically, when you think about it, especially cruising, like if you're cruising around, for one, on a diesel, it's going to be harder on the engine. So if you're cruising, right, think about you and your friend, you're both carrying a cooler, right? The cooler weighs 100 pounds. It's 50 pounds a piece. Not really that bad to carry that cooler. You guys are making good pace, running down to the boat. Your buddy over here, he just stops walking. You turn your engine off. Then you are still carrying that cooler. Now all of a sudden that 100-pound cooler, aka your boat, is now you're the one dragging that cooler down. And now you've also got your buddy, the other engine, that's just being drug along, especially like on that, because your running gear, you can't just trim it out like you can with an outboard. An outboard, you can trim that engine out of the water and get the drag off the boat, but your actual engine, now obviously your speed's going to be a factor here. But if you think about a 100-foot yacht, how much does this boat weigh? It's going to be very, very heavy. Now, if you're just putting down, a river or something, and you're only running, you're running very slow speeds, that's going to be a different discussion. But if we're talking about cruising, you're cruising at, say, 10, 15 knots, and you just turn the engine off, you're going to be loading up that other engine because now it is holding the entire load of that cooler or the entire weight of that boat. So for one, your fuel burn on that engine is going to go up, but you're also going to be putting a lot more wear and a lot more load on that engine. And it's going to be bogged down. So I can't think of a scenario where that's going to be good for the engine. Like I said, if you're, cruising like idling where, it's not really overloading your engine, then that's different. But if we're talking about like cruising, yeah, I don't think that would be very good. Even if you put the running gear in idle and now that propeller is just spinning in the water, it's still added drag on that side of the boat, and the other engine is now bearing the burden of all that drag, not to mention trying to move the weight of that boat by itself. So honestly, depending on the speed that you're trolling, like same thing, move it over to the outboard discussion, and you're trolling in your boat. Depending on what speed you're trolling at, yeah, you can save some fuel and save some time on your engine by trimming the one out or, leaving it in, whatever you want to do. I mean, I don't think that's really a good idea, but people do whatever they want to do. The one engine, your fuel burn's going to go up on it, but at the right speed, there's going to be a happy medium where you are saving fuel and you are saving time on the engine, but at the same time, at certain speeds, you're not saving fuel because you've got to increase the RPM of that one engine to get it to bear the burden of the boat based on the speed that you're trying to go. So I don't think the turning one off and running on one is really the best in any situation, really. Robbie Howell will do you for the last comment. And it says, so it sounds like in a typical outboard head gasket job, you don't automatically have to machine the heads. Depending on why you are changing your head gasket is going to determine whether or not you got to do something with your heads or not. Like with an outboard, you're running raw water through your engine to cool it. So a lot of times you'll see head gaskets that fail and you can catch them, before there's a problem. So when the head gasket fails, you're leaking coolant into your cylinder. You've got a running problem, but as long as you catch it early enough, before any damage is done, yeah, you can clean up your head, put it back together, change your head gasket, and not have to machine the entire head, which is a big cost depending on who's doing the work and what exactly the problem is. But every situation is going to be different. If you've gotten to the point where you've been burning water in your engine and it's eating up the heads of the valves and you've got all kinds of damage inside the head, yeah, that head needs to be redone. So it needs to go to a machine shop. You need to get the valves done. Like, yeah, that needs to happen. But do you automatically do it? It depends, it totally depends on the situation. Generally, if you are, so one situation is that you're trying to do something on a budget. So let's say you've got an older engine and it needs to have the head gasket done because the head gasket's failed, whatever the reason. It's not really damaged your head just yet, and you just want to get the engine back on the water. It's an older engine. The engine is worth, say, $3-4 grand to replace it. You're paying a shop to, change the head gasket out. It's going to end up costing you, let's say, cost you 4 hours of labor, $200 a pop. That's $800 in labor plus $100 in taxes, fees, and gasket and all that. So you're $900 to just change your head gasket. Now, your head could be fine and we could put it all back together and there not be an issue, and you can get another 1,000 hours out of the engine without having any problems. Most people, or the other scenario is we send your head off and it's going to cost you another grand just to get that done. A lot of people will, because of their budget, say, put it back together. The engine's only worth $3-4 grand. I'm not going to put $2,500 into this engine to redo the head when if I can get another 5, 6, 7, 800 hours out of the engine, that's another 5-6 years for me out of that boat. So only getting your engine done for $900 today and getting 5 more years out of it when it's only worth $3-4 grand, that's kind of it depends also on the budget. So, it kind of comes into making an executive decision on how much is this engine worth. It's not like spending the time and the money to get a head redone, depending on the damage. Obviously, some engines are going to be less to do depending on is needing done, but it all kind of comes down to budget. What's the damage? What's the situation? It's not really an automatically send the heads off to get them machined. So that's my thought.